Oh, Canada, spectacle of a country, one of the only countries who never had to fight for independence, but just politely asked instead. It went on to become a great tactical and economical part of the British Empire, and go on to become a great ally of both the UK and US. And it's one of the only countries to never lose a single war in its entire history, due to its peacefulness and strong allies. But what if Canada had been just a little less polite? What if Canada fought for independence? This alternate timeline begins in 1760 when a new tax is put on the Quebecois part of Canada for the war as well as the 13 colonies in Nova Scotia. It would anger the French population enough to cause more riots during the 1760s, and then after the Boston Massacre, the British would preemptively militarize Quebec, fearing that they would turn to open rebellion just like the American colonies. Nova Scotia would have more riots during this time and would end up siding with the Americans, thinking that they were next. America, who had sour relations with Quebec, would refuse to help them in any way, but would aid Nova Scotia in an attempted invasion after the Continental Army would be set up. Meanwhile, Quebec would begin guerrilla fighting, like seen in the beginning of the American Revolution, but since they didn't have a large French population, the Quebecois would be stuck in a constant guerrilla warfare and assassination attempts on the general governor. Eventually, General Governor James Murray would crack down on the French cities hard, causing France to react a lot sooner than it did in our timeline. They would side with the Quebec, but hold off on supporting America since, America still hated Quebec. But soon, America and Quebec would work together during the Battle of Montreal in Quebec City when the guerrillas would support the Americans' attack, causing a victory. The French and the Spanish would begin sending troops and advisors, causing Britain to begin to feel more overwhelmed already, and after both declaring independence and taking more and more defeats of the British military, they would sue for peace and allow independence of the two countries. America would get almost the same land grant it did in our timeline, but Quebec would take Rupert's Land in the Midwest. Nova Scotia would eventually go the way of Texas, trying to be independent for a while, but join the United States after realizing it just can't support itself. A mass migration of British loyalists would go back to Britain, as there was no British Canada to flee to in this timeline. Quebec would most likely stay with the Parliament-style government, but most likely restrict English representation because irony. The new conflict would begin when America would have problems and different claims over the Midwest and Maine. Soon America would ally itself with Britain just to appease the anti-Franco, support in the colonies. France and Quebec would have an uneasy alliance until the French Revolution and the Bonaparte coup, which would see them become greater allies as they both have more Republican ideals. Napoleon would decide that having a balance to the USA and North America would be important, as if they were to declare war on France, the USA could easily just take Louisiana, so they sold to Quebec, thinking it was better for them. Except for Napoleon was very wrong, as that just dragged Quebec into this conflict, with America deciding to release its anti-Quebec feelings in a war to take New Orleans, the Midwest, and maybe even Quebec if they really felt like it. The USA would have the same shortcomings it did in our timeline, and along with the Quebec government using the Aboriginals against the USA, the US and Quebec would be stuck in stalemate for most of the war. Since the war was really going nowhere, and Napoleon was just toppled and Britain was tired of fighting, they decided that, America could just get a couple Midwestern land and they could call it even. Quebec would take this time to strengthen its army and create more migration to the west. Meanwhile, the USA would decide that if it couldn't expand west, it would try and turn south. Migration to Cuba and the Yucatan would begin during this time. During all of this, Texas would be born a lot earlier, as the Americans mass moving from Louisiana to Mexico since slavery was outlawed. The Texas Revolution would go almost the same, and Texas would be free once again. Though it would still face the crippling debt and decline that it did in our timeline, only that it couldn't be annexed by America this time. So instead, America would decide to loan the government money instead, so then it could have another ally to counter Quebec. America would begin to become a problematic situation itself whenever it realized the South was becoming more prominent with its con business and greater prominence in government. This would cause the North to begin to demand to separate from the South. After President Jefferson Davis would be elected, the North would begin to secede with New York as their capital. Abraham Lincoln would become the President of the United England States. Since Texas was already reliant on the USA, it wouldn't be much help to the South. Meanwhile, in the North, Quebec would support England, thinking that, hey, anything to mess with the Americans. During this civil war, France and Texas would work together in invading Mexico due to its severe debt. The U.S. would also support the invasion and gain the support of France during the war. Mexico would be divided into three, but the U.S. would ultimately have to let go of the North after they realized they couldn't win a prolonged war with the North. After the war, New England would begin their own European-style country, beginning with their imperial ambitions among Africa and Asia. Meanwhile, Quebec would stabilize their border with Texas and purchase Russian Alaska, believing that the Quebecois were entitled to all northern lands. After the formation of the German Empire, the world would begin to start picking sides. The powers of Europe and North America had begun to turn on each other, setting up for a world war. Anyways, guys, that's all the time I have for this video. If you like this video, feel free to hit the like button. If you like my content, feel free to subscribe and share it with other people if you want. And if you saw something in this scenario that you would want to change or something else you thought would happen, leave it in the comments below, along with any suggestions you have for any future videos you may want me to do. Anyways, guys, have a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye.
C'est le seul qui reste au bout de nos jours. Les vœux que l'on fait, les fleurs que l'on sème, chacun les récolte en soi-même. Au beau jardin du temps qui court, gens du pays, c'est votre tour de vous laisser.